Ja, velkommen alle sammen. Klokken er lige præcis 3, vi starter. Mit navn er Torben Kittar, jeg skal være ordstyrer i 3 kvarter. Og jeg siger med det samme, det kommer til at foregå på engelsk. Hvis I har spørgsmål, ting I ikke forstår, så sig lige til. Der er mange, der har meninger her. Hvis der er noget, I ikke forstår, eller noget, som I godt kunne tænke lige at få gentaget, så sig til. Men vi kører altså på engelsk, det gør fordi vi har en gæst, jeg skal præsentere om et øjeblik. Og vi har 3 andre gæster, som sidder hernede, og de kommer også op lige om et øjeblik. Har I spørgsmål undervejs, så kom endelig med dem. Jeg skal prøve at holde øje med, hvis I ser markere og få jer med ind i diskussionen, fordi det er spændende. Og lige til sidst, inden vi starter, så vil jeg sige, at jeg hedder Torben Kittar. Jeg er tidligere redaktør på Aarhus Universitet Frede Olesen. Jeg stoppede for 2 måneder siden, så jeg er ikke helt gået i frø endnu. Jeg kan godt huske det meste af det, men med det ord, så vil vi starte. And we have a guest, as I told the people here attending the session. It's Gregor Smith from the Scottish Ministry of Health, I think. But I think it's better that you introduce yourself briefly. Who are you and why are you here?
Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Good, good. So my name's Gregor Smith. My role in Scotland is I'm Deputy Chief Medical Officer. I don't think you've got an equivalent of that in Denmark, but to roughly explain it, if I work for the Scottish Government, but I'm independent of the Scottish Government, and my role is to provide independent clinical advice to the ministers and to what we call NHS Scotland. And my boss, Catherine Calderwood, she is the Chief Medical Officer, so she is the head of the medical profession in Scotland.
Good, thank you very much. We're almost in Scotland, and I hope this can keep you warm, because it's a pretty cool day. But anyway, Gregor, tell us about this thing, clusters. In Danish, it's klynger. We're going to talk about clusters. What are they, and what should we have this kind of cooperation between GPs?
So before I start to talk about clusters, maybe one of the things I should begin to explain is a little bit of the context as to why clusters came about in Scotland and why we've chosen to go down this route. The first thing about clusters is, I guess, to explain that they are groups of GP practices coming together to work in a collaborative way around about quality improvement, about learning and about mutual support. And the reason they started to come about was an approach that we've taken in Scotland, probably started about 2012, where we were able to develop I guess the first move towards a Scottish GP contract. Before that, Scotland, as part of the United Kingdom, all the GPs worked towards a UK contract. But we started to negotiate elements of the contract for the first time in 2012. That was born out of, I guess, a real frustration amongst GPs that the contract really was no longer fit for purpose and wasn't able to allow them to be able to provide the type of care that they wanted to provide. So we started to explore with the profession as to, well, if that contract doesn't work, then what type of contract might work for you? At the same time, there was massive structural transformational change in Scotland. So instead of the 14 health boards that we had, we started to see forming health and social care partnerships coming together. These were organisations that brought together both elements of healthcare and, very importantly, elements of social care at the same time. So this is the first time we had ever tried anything like this in Scotland. And clusters were born out of those discussions. Clusters were an attempt to give GPs the ability to play their part within those health and social care partnerships, to influence the strategic commissioning within those, and actually to try to improve the quality of care for patients within those as well.
So you say it's sort of, the idea is to improve quality, but isn't there also some kind of element in it that the colleagues, the peers, they sort of take over the control from the authorities so that you sort of steer it yourself?
So one of the really important things here is that the Scottish Government decided on a strategic and a policy basis that one of the important things that could happen is that they ceded power to a local level. So that rather than always this top-down approach in terms of healthcare, there are actually local groups were deciding what was important for those local populations. So all the discussion, rather than happening at a national level to decide that the priority for Scotland was going to be cardiovascular disease or alcohol-related liver disease or whatever it might be, actually we recognise that in different areas of Scotland there might be different priorities. So devolve that decision making down to a local level, to these partnerships that we're developing, and allow the clusters to become involved in those discussions, because after all, general practice knows their patients. I was able to start to really feed into those discussions in a very meaningful way about the type of priorities and the way that some of those resources should be spent against those priorities at a local level.
But tell us, how does it happen? How does it function on a day-to-day basis? If, for instance, you were a GP in Glasgow, how would it work with this cooperation? Would you talk to each other every week, or what would you do?
So there's different ways that they work just now, and I must say to you that they're at different stages of development in Scotland just now. Some are really motoring ahead and showing already some really good work that's making a big difference for patients. And the ones where it's working really, really well, what they tend to have is that there's a representative from each practice who is nominated by the practice to be their practice quality lead. And they become a member of the cluster group, which has a cluster quality lead. So someone who is nominated by their peers and by the health and social care partnerships to show those leadership skills in forming the cluster together.
So they meet at night or in the day?
So they have protected time through their contract to meet on a regular basis. Initially, once a week, just to get them started, but we anticipate that over time that will gradually become less and probably move to something along the lines of maybe an afternoon every couple of weeks.
Okay. How many people would typically attend these meetings?
It depends on the size of the cluster. So geographically across Scotland, you'll recognise we have some very rural areas, we've got some very urban areas. In the urban areas, tends to be the practices, maybe between 8 and 10 practices would be involved in a cluster. And so there might be 8 to 10 representatives round about the table talking about this. At the moment, it's just GPs. But in the future, what we want to try to do is to try to evolve those clusters into slightly bigger, more all-encompassing, so other healthcare professionals becoming involved. And I think really important, one of the prizes for the future is to involve the public within those discussions as well.
Do you report to somebody? Do you write it down and send reports in?
And this is one of the things that we're going through the discussions in our current negotiations, is where do these clusters report to? At the moment, they have a very loose line of reporting which is into the health and social care partnerships. But we recognise that within those health and social care partnership structures, there's a group that exists in every health board in Scotland called the GP subcommittee. And what we want to do is we want to strengthen the working of that GP subcommittee, make it a much more strategic facing group who can get involved in these discussions, take some of the reports back from these clusters and really start to influence at a board level some of the commissioning decisions that are made around about how care is provided.
Final question, how does this affect the patients? Can they sort of experience that you work together and that the quality is going up? What do you think?
Well, as I say, the caution around about this is that it's at very early stages. But I'll give you a good example of some of the effects that is already having on patients. So one of our clusters decided that in terms of an area of need that they had was in the way that they provided care to patients who were in care homes. And it was very haphazard beforehand. So you maybe had 5 different GP practices providing care to one care home. And so they were in and out all the time, and it wasn't good for the GP practice and it wasn't good for the patient. But instead they got together, they had a discussion, how can we make this better? And they decided that the best way to do that was to have one GP practice providing care to each care home. So they coordinated their care in a different way. And from there, what they did is they started to develop a much more anticipatory approach to care. So rather than just going in on a reactive basis when someone became ill, they started doing ward rounds a couple of times a week, actually being very proactive in terms of the way that they went into those care homes, trying to find the problems before they became problems. And I think that's a really good example of how, through that kind of mutual, supportive, collaborative arrangement, you can actually start to make sure that care is much more structured in the way that it's given.
Fine. Thank you for now. And now you just stay here, Gregor. Frede Olesen, please come up here and watch the... Yes. Our next guest is Professor Frede Olesen, and maybe you should introduce yourself shortly.
Yes, I'm a former GP and professor at general practice in Aarhus University, and I have liaised with Gregor about the developments in Scotland and followed some of the developments in Scotland with very great interest, because I think they have taken an approach that might be of great inspiration for Denmark.
You have maybe been one of the driving forces in getting this idea into the sort of discussions in Denmark, I understand, isn't it?
Well, in many ways I've been very happy to see that our leadership in general practice in Denmark took a study trip to Scotland and had a very good and productive interaction with Gregor and with the Scottish initiatives, and I'm very happy. Even if I don't know exactly what's going on in the Danish negotiations, I have a feeling that the Danish system is on the track to take a very, very large leap forward in the way we organize Danish healthcare system, and cluster organization may be one of the most important parts of a great step forward in Denmark.
Why do you think that?
I think the cluster solve two sort of problems. Clusters are groups of GPs working together, and traditionally we in Denmark said that if we should have GPs work together, they should go into large health centers, but that doesn't work in many places. You need to make GPs work together, but you don't necessarily need to make them go into big health centers. What we do in the cluster system is that you make the GPs, say 20, 30 GPs work together, and by having them working together they can obtain two targets. Target number one is something internal in the cluster. They can coordinate, as we heard a brilliant example of. They can work with quality. In the long run they may even work with special staff, IT support and other types of special staff that can support a group of practices in their internal work. And a special thing in the Scottish system, which is extremely important in my opinion, is that they have a cluster lead, so that you also have a precise person from where the other part of the healthcare system can talk into a cluster. But then it comes to the other important part of the cluster system, is that you can create a voice from GP through the cluster lead up to the health boards. And that's what I find extremely important in the approach the Scottish have taken, so that you get a dialogue in both directions, and in that way push a comprehensive healthcare system much more together than we traditionally have done.
Before we started the session, we talked about how could we compare this to something else we know in Denmark, and you mentioned a very good example from the Danish agricultural sector. Could you please repeat it, because I think it's very illustrative for what this is all about.
In my vision about the clusters, it has many similarities with what we had in what we in Denmark call andelsbevægelsen. Because if, for instance, you take andelsbevægelsen around farmers, if you respected that there were different farms, a lot of places around, there were different farmers, but they worked together in a group. And if there was one in the group who delivered bad milk, the peers went to him and said, well, we all lose because of that. It was not a check-up system from top coming, it was the peers. And even over time, the peers began to employ staff that supported this quality. So there's an internal working with quality, which is not run from top down, but which is run by peers. And that's what I think is one of the big opportunities, and you can do it without having to push doctors into large health centers. I'm not opposed to large health centers as such, but there's a lot of rural areas where that's not the way forward. So I think if I can go into Danish for 10 sentences, and we have talked about it, vi kan på mange måder sammenligne det med andelsbevægelsen, når den var bedst.
That makes sense, and we can understand that. I understand also, Fred, that you have been to Wales and studied what they do there, and that's a little bit different from what they do in Scotland. Can you tell us about it?
Well, looking around the world, I've seen over the last 5-10 years that the cluster approach has come into action in many countries. We've seen it in the Netherlands, especially around special staff. We've seen it in New Zealand with special activity. I've seen in the northern Italy wonderful examples of cluster. And the last good example I saw was in Wales, where they really came into negotiations with the government, and the government pushed, as you have done also, pushed a lot of energy and a lot of money into it, a lot of courses for the cluster leaders, and a lot of supportive activity, including an infrastructure that delivers data to the clusters, but not forcing them to do this or that, but an infrastructure that really are supportive for the clusters. And that's what we've seen in Wales, including, I even think that Wales put more money into it than you did they? A little bit competition here.
I'm not sure. I think it was about the same because we looked at their model.
Yes, at least you are running forward. And the interesting thing is also that the England, Wales and Scotland are actually three different healthcare systems. We often talk about UK and think it's the same. England has quit the pay-for-performance approach and this quite top-down way of running the system, and we were a group of researchers who ran into deep analysis of the pay-for-performance system and had to conclude in the paper in BMJ a year ago that the pay-for-performance system really didn't push the development forward as much as we sometimes like to think. So I do think that the cluster approach in many ways is a better quality development than a accreditation approach to quality as I see it. But that's how we have discussed it and how we followed it. And, yeah.
Greg, do you have a piece of advice to the Danish doctors now that we're sort of in the process of starting this? You sort of, you say to me, you are in the curve 2 or curve 3, whereas we are in curve 1.
So, Fred is right. There is no such thing as a National Health Service anymore. There are 4 different versions of the National Health Service that operate in the UK. And Scotland has committed itself to following a route that relies on professionalism. So we trust the profession to do the right thing. We trust to the intrinsic motivations that they have to do the right thing for the patients. And that's the way that we will receive our quality improvement, quality assurance, if you like. Now, it needs to be a little bit more than that. So if you look at the English example, it's an example of new public management where there's inspection, there's scrutiny, there's targets. We still have some of that, but it has to be proportionate. And where we are just now is we've moved on to that second curve, which is about quality improvement. And how do you equip a professional workforce to do the best for their patients using quality improvement techniques? The real prize where we're really starting to move into now, and I think this is where you're getting to, is in this sense of what we call co-creation. So how do you develop services, how do you develop the clinical pathways, how do you assure quality between professionals and most importantly with the public? To do it hand in hand, ceding power to the public to be part of that discussion. And that's the really exciting part about where we are just now. So if there's one piece of advice to the Danish doctors I would give, is don't be scared of ceding power. Don't be scared of that, because actually unless you're prepared to do that, you're fighting against a rising tide where you will consume energy very, very unhelpfully.
I would like to broaden the discussion about the cluster development a little bit, looking into the Danish healthcare system. Because at this moment in the Danish healthcare system, I'm really worried about the development for the hospitals. They are overloaded and they really don't need quite how to create a comprehensive healthcare system. And I do think that the cluster system is a vehicle to push this development towards a comprehensive, seamless healthcare system where GPs are a very responsible part in the system, but also where the GP's voice is heard up in the system in a new way. So my largest worry at this moment in the development is that I'm not quite sure that the administrative and political system in Denmark really have seen how large a jump forward we might take if we go the Scottish development. So I really hope that the Danish development is not a discussion about money, it's a discussion about general practice version 2.
Okay, before we have the next guest, are there any questions? Not yet. Don't fall asleep, there will be more coming.
Can I say just one last thing, just to add to Freddie's last bit there? One of the most important, someone asked me 2 weeks ago, a very senior person from NHS England asked me, what do you get from this? What do you as a healthcare system get from this approach? And at its most simplest terms, we get a sustainable general practice in a strong primary care. And I think that without this approach, we don't have the resilience within current general practice, certainly in the UK, to be able to keep on doing things the way that we've been doing in the past. Because when you look at the demographic challenges that we should be celebrating, because we're keeping people alive for longer, but it's much more complex to keep them alive. And the only way that we can do that is to have much more complex networks of clinical teams providing those care.
Yes, now we will replace you with Christian Freitag. Correct your stay. You come all the way from Scotland to stay.
Come on, Christian.
And Christian Freitag is chairman of the Danish GPs organization. And Christian, we know that this has been an issue in the ongoing discussions about a new agreement. Oh yes, about a new agreement between you and the Danish regions. So can you tell us, why do you attach such an importance to this idea of clusters in the negotiations with the Danish regions?
I think that Gregor and Frede actually told the story, and we recognize ourselves in why you did as you did in Scotland. We are quite behind in time schedule, but we got the same challenges that you see in front of you. So I think it is about quality, and definitely I mark out that what we're doing, or what we're planning to doing in Denmark, is not to copy Scotland or to copy the Netherlands or New Zealand or wherever we have been. We haven't been to New Zealand, but not yet. But we're not going to copy those, because we can't copy. We've got another kind of systems, but we can learn from them. And so we're trying to build up the Danish way of this. How can we get increased quality in general practice without a large controlling system, and at the same time increasing the joy of working among the doctors, because actually we got a problem there as well in Denmark. And we hope, we don't know, but we hope that it can be also a way to recruit young doctors to the job as a GP, because we got a large portion of new coming general practitioners, well educated, but it's not sure that they will end up in general practice. So we have that in mind as well when we make these plans in Denmark.
Could you reveal a little bit of the secrets that you're talking with the Danish regions about? What is going to happen? What do you imagine could come out of a new agreement in relation to these clusters?
Yeah. In this area, we definitely are quite ambitious in terms of how fast we want people to move into clusters. We've seen it in Holland. It took 10 years in Holland from the first cluster to where they are now. And we haven't got that time in Denmark because we're too far behind. So we are, one of the challenges is to make this translation in a very short time. On the other hand, we actually want to make it voluntarily. We don't want to force doctors into work with quality in a certain way, because we don't think it works. So we want to make it very attractive to be in a cluster, and we want to make it easy to get new doctors if you are in a cluster. But we don't. If you have some religious faith, you are against clusters, then you will be allowed to stay out from a cluster in Denmark.
But will this not undermine the whole system? Let's say if 1/3 of the doctors say we don't want to have anything to do about that, we talk with the other doctors and that's fine with us.
I told you we're planning to make it very attractive to come in to a cluster. We don't want to punish the doctors which are outside, but we want to make it very, very attractive to be in a cluster. And I haven't met one doctor who doesn't think it's very interesting working with their own quality, with the clinic's own quality, to compare, if it's possible, to compare with other clinics. We all think that that's very exciting.
But you must have met some of your colleagues saying that, I can do that myself.
Yeah.
What do you answer?
We had to see. We're not going to force anyone in a cluster. But we are convinced that this is a good idea. We're convinced that the learning from some doctors will show others that it might as well be better than we thought it was. And because it's planned by the PLO and the RLNT or whatever it's called. It doesn't sound very attractive, but we hope to make a surprise.
Why do you think the Danish regions, or the RT and why do you think they are sort of positive when they talk about this idea?
I see that they realize that they can't control all the way down to the specific consultation between the doctor and the patient. Well, that's the negative way of talking it. The good way of pronouncing it is to say that this is value-based learning, this is value-based management, and it is actually. You manage by values, and quality is definitely a value that inspires doctors. So it is. We are actually saying, well, look at your own quality, compare it with your neighbor, and think for yourself. We don't need anyone to come and say you're better than she is. It's not going to be better or worse. It's just going to be, where am I compared to the others? There could be a good explanation that I, as a doctor in Holte, north of Copenhagen, I'm rather good at treating my diabetics because everybody got a very low blood sugar. It could be because people in Holte are very keen on, when they get the diagnosis diabetic, they go out running and they stop eating all those things they should need. And it's much more difficult to have the same patients in another part of Copenhagen or Zealand. So it actually is more fair.
Those doctors who want to join the cluster idea, are they awarded by a little bit of money in the new agreement?
It's attractive, but it will not be the money that keeps us in. There will be some startup capital if we find out, but that will not do the difference. No, we can't do this by buying people to work with quality. It's not the right way.
You sort of hinted at that the Danish regions, they found out they couldn't force you to do things you didn't want to do. Have they given up and resigned and said, okay, there's too much resistance among the doctors and the GPs, so we want to give it back to them, sort of the control back to the doctors?
Actually, no. I think the people that I talk to, I think they have seen the good ideas and the good motivation behind, for example, clusters. I think actually they know that this could be better for the Danish healthcare system, and then it is better for the Danish region as well. Definitely, it's not. But we have been through a phase. They've done that at the hospitals about these accreditation and measuring everything out, and people has to to produce more, you have to work faster. It has been the regime for the last 10 years, and we have to deal with that. And this could be one way to deal with this.
But does this mean that accreditation is sort of over? It's going to disappear?
I don't know that. I haven't got the answer, but I think this is better than accreditation. I think it's much cheaper because the quality improvement will become only by doctors working together. And we know it actually from science that if you put 20 doctors into a room and tell them to discuss this subject and tell them to look at their own patient in this area, then they go home and make it better without any control, without any exams. Of course we have to measure that they are improving, because we have to do that in the Danish healthcare system, but it's not necessary to be a part of the package.
It sounds very good. And now we're going to talk to another guest. Mads, please come up here. And Christian, I have to throw it down because we can't be so many people up here. You can always come back. Our last guest is Mads Koch Hansen. And Mads, maybe you can present yourself in fluent English, please.
Well, of course. My name is Mads Koch Hansen. I'm the medical director for a hospital in Jutland. You know where that is. And I used to be chairman of the Danish Medical Association for 5 years. Yeah, that was the presentation.
Yes. When you hear all this talking about this brand new world of clusters and working together, what sort of peer organization like, what do you think? Is this a good idea?
I think this is a brilliant idea. Actually, I went to Scotland together with my colleagues at the board of directors at the hospital nearly a year ago, and we heard about this development in Scotland. And I think this is one of the things we actually are missing here in Denmark. A good way of working together as a hospital and the GPs in our area about our common patients. We have some old systems with consultants of GPs working together with the hospital, and we can do a lot of good work with them, but it's only 7 or 8 GPs in our area, but there may be around 80 or 180 GPs in our area, and a lot of them we never see, we never talk to them, and we only write letters to each other. When they refer patients, write something to us, and when we have treated the patients, we write something to them. This is not a good way of cooperation, this is not development, and we need a new way of cooperation in the future to keep the patients out of the hospitals, because in Denmark the development have been very much on putting more money into the secondary sector, into the hospitals, and building new hospitals and get them greater and more patients into the hospitals. If we should succeed with the task for the healthcare system in the years to come, we have to do it another way. We have to put money into the primary sector, into the GPs, and we must have a new way of cooperation on the quality issues. So I think this would be brilliant.
It sounds like it's a fantastic idea. Everybody can sort of get their hands up. Are there any questions? I wonder if there was somebody down here thinking, what is this going to mean? What is this going to mean in the daily life? What is this going to mean for the patients? There must be somebody sitting with a burning question.
Hello, my name is Mads. I'm in KBU here at Aarhus Hospital. I would like to hear, do you see a tendency for more narrow subspecialization in your clusters when you have these big corporations of general practitioners?
So I think the short answer to that is, at this stage, no, we don't see subspecialisation within those clusters, although we do have a GP community who tend to have some special interests, and many of them work within hospital systems as associate specialists within those hospital systems. I think that perhaps one of the things that we may see more of in the future is that some of that subspecialisation will develop, so that you may have GPs who have a particular interest, for instance, in sexual health or in minor surgery or in anything, and they start to take on a role within that cluster on behalf of the cluster, so working on behalf of all the practices. But at this stage we're not seeing that.
Anybody else want to come in? There's a question.
I'm Christina and I'm one of the upcoming GPs. I have a question, whether in Scotland do people have their own doctor? Like in Denmark we talk about family doctors and they go to their own doctor. Is it like the same in Scotland, or is it the cluster is one big way?
It's a really good question, because this is key in terms of the discussions. GP practices have a practice list, so they may average maybe 4 or 5 GPs who would work within a practice, and depending on how that practice organises itself, either they will operate a list structure within that where all patients will go to a nominated GP, or they'll share the patients between the 4 or 5 GPs. Probably the model that is most common now is that practice list, whereby if you're a member of a practice, you'll see any of the 4 or 5 GPs within that practice. It's really important that we preserve that, because that offers the continuity of care that we all know is really, really important to family medicine. So that was the reason I became a GP, was because I wanted to have develop that relationship with people and their families. So I don't anticipate the future that those clusters will become super practices of, 25, 30 GPs providing care. I think that, for me, just now would feel like the wrong move. But what it does is it offers some of the best elements of that approach in terms of how you, as peers, support each other and take an approach to quality improvement, but still have that practice that's small enough to offer that continuity of care.
Mads, you had a comment?
Yes, something different, but a year ago we got a new national goals for the health system. Instead of the accreditation, we have some common goals, and to reach these goals we need to be very aligned on the way we work. We have changed the way of quality work in hospitals, as Christian said before. Talking to the doctor's heart instead of control, make them develop the good quality. Everybody who goes to work wants to do good quality for the patients, and if we keep on asking for the wrong things, we will get the wrong things out of the doctors. So to do good cooperation, we have to be together on the quality work as well. We have no cooperation with the GPs on quality improvement today, but we could have that very easily in the future if we have these clusters, I think.
The approach that we've taken to the whole issue of how do you make sure that people participate in clusters has been slightly different, and we've chosen to go down a route agreed with the BMA in Scotland, who are the Doctors Association, is that we'll mandate involvement as part of their contractual obligation. And we felt strongly about that, and the BMA agreed very strongly with us about that as well. And the reason for that was there's no hiding place from quality. There's no hiding place, and if it's a peer-led, values-driven approach to quality, then GPs and doctors, whatever their background, shouldn't be afraid of that at all. That's part of professionalism. So we were very comfortable, as were the BMA, in having that as a contractual stipulation.
In the papers, when you talk about the way you do it in Scotland, you also mentioned that there could be some kind of relief of administrative burdens. And I would like to ask you, Christian, do you think this is also going to lead to some relief for one of the things that have been an issue, that the administrative burdens are sort of too big?
Actually, it will not be the purpose of the Danish clusters, because we actually don't want to interfere from the beginning of. We don't want to interfere with the way the different clinics want to do their work. So we start up in quality. It's for the first time in Denmark we do this. Hopefully we do it in a very short time with a lot of doctors, But we don't want to change the way of administrating. We don't want to attach them to some certain IT systems which they don't like because they love the one they got. And we don't want to make them, force them to cooperate with some people or some institutes or hospitals from the beginning of, because it's too big a step for the first time. So actually we in Denmark, if it's going to be as we think it is, we will start up in quality. But of course we hope that this, in a longer term or in a short term, will relieve of some from this administration work that every clinic.
But you said before that we were sort of lagging behind Scotland and other countries, and we had to speed the process up. How fast do you think this is going to be, and what will you do to make it fast?
I hope that in this quality way of working we can do it very fast, and I think that when we become data, when we start sharing data with the hospitals and with the municipalities, the kommuner in Denmark, then this will speed up the process as well, because we of course we're interested in see how does our patient perform in the hospital system and down in the social security system and in the local community. So I think this will develop from here, but you know, you can't plan this in an agreement one day to look 2, 3, 4, 6, 5 years ahead. You can't do that. So we have to start up somewhere, and we start up with quality.
And Frede Olesen?
I think that it's worth stressing that one of the reasons that the Scottish system, in my opinion, has got such a good position on the track is an excellent support from the political system, from the administrative system, and an excellent collaboration between the union, the college, and the administrative system. And I think in many ways this is a precondition for the speed by which we can move forwards. And I see exactly the same good trends in Denmark just now, and I'm very happy to see those very good trends. But I think it's worth stressing that this is a precondition for a success.
There's a lot of C words that we could use at this point in time. So collaboration is really important. Commitment is really important to really believe that what you're doing is the right thing and to see it through. And courage. Courage is probably the most important word, because actually this is something that once you've embarked upon it, it won't pay immediate dividends. And as a profession, and the politicians need courage to see this through, because you know, we've started the journey in Scotland, but you know, it's going to be, I'll be completely honest, we're not going to see immediate effects of it. We're seeing some good signs that it's the right thing to do. That gives us confidence, another C word. But actually what we need to do is have the courage and conviction to give this enough time to fully develop.
We have a question.
Hello, my name is Henrik Kies. I'm a GP in Jutland. One of my concerns is the lack of resources, the lack of doctors, the lack of resources to employ people in the clinics. And this is a quality project. And could you tell a little bit about what is your thoughts about how much time should every clinic use on quality systems? Because today many clinics is just working a lot of patient contact. Is this a self-sustainability system so that every doctor could just actually more or less work like they do? Or should they use maybe 4, 5, 10, 15% on quality work after this? What is your thought about and your experience on that?
Again, I think that's a really good question about this, because it's something that we have considered really, really deeply as to what do we mean by a GP's role in quality. So what we are doing must be seen in the context of a contractual negotiation that will start to redefine what the role of a GP is in Scotland. Completely redefining it. And we think there's 3 areas where GPs can bring their skills to bear. It's in the management of complex care. It's in the management of undifferentiated presentation. So what we mean by that is, you know, symptoms which may or may not have significance, which you've got to pick your way through. And the third thing is the leadership in quality and safety. And we think, in terms of the agreement that we're brokering through this contract, is that probably it's reasonable to expect that, you know, around 10 to 20% of a GP's time should be used within that quality bracket. Now, if we're going to do that, we need to create the capacity that allows them to do that. Now, we in Scotland are experiencing workforce difficulties in general practice. Young doctors are tending, over the last few years, have not tended to choose it as their career of choice in medicine. So we've got to make it much more attractive to people, and that's what we're trying to do with a whole range of initiatives. But at the same time as doing that, the other thing we're trying to do is we're trying to expand the multidisciplinary team that will support practices as well. So for instance, making sure that pharmacists are working much more closely with general practice in their practices. And already some of the work that we're doing there has shown that by putting a pharmacist in alongside a GP practice, we're reducing by about 50% some of the administrative tasks that they've been having to undertake in relation to medicines. So we're creating capacity as part of the plan that will allow GPs to play a much fuller role in quality.
We have another question. Can you make it short?
Yes, I'm not a doctor, I'm a dietitian. I'm a clinical dietitian. I'm from the association, the Danish clinical dietitians. And my question is, the clusters in Scotland, do they also have other staff as physiotherapists, nutritionists in some way, or other kind of staff? Because that's our big wish, that it could be a possibility in the Danish model, because it will also take time from the doctors, and it's necessary to have this big capacity of different types of skills. Thank you.
At the moment, no. The clusters are purely GP clusters. Now there's reasons for that are long and complicated, but essentially, no, it's GPs at the moment. However, I would anticipate that as these GP clusters develop and as they mature, we'll start to see other professionals coming in and making a very valuable contribution to the working of them as well. But I think they need time to develop first before we do that.
And a final comment from you, Mads, and then Christian.
Yes, a comment on the courage and the politicians. I'm afraid that our politicians are not all that full of courage. So I think maybe we should start without them, Christian, and just find a way of cooperation with the hospitals and the GPs, and we can start in our area. That would be very interesting to do, and maybe get some of the Danish find a Danish way to do things, and then we can talk with the politicians afterwards.
What do you think, Christian? Brave new world.
Yeah, I agree that then when the doctors have been glad for the cluster, when they have been in the clusters for some period and say this is the way, then of course we can cooperate with the hospital, with the local hospital, without asking anybody, I hope. And I think what you said, Gregor, is the answer on Henrik. What are we going? This is why we are not going to copy Scotland, because we don't have a prime minister in Denmark who have said we want to increase and improve Danish primary care in a way that we haven't seen before. We haven't heard that from our Prime Minister. So we have to do it in another way. And when the Prime Minister doesn't say that, we have to do some rather smaller steps. And we envy you, your leadership in your country, but we can't wait just sitting down and hoping for getting the same leadership on this area in Denmark. So we have to act, and this is what we're trying. So the steps will be shorter in Denmark, as I told you. This is the reason.
Okay, we'll see if we can get the Prime Minister here. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Greg, for coming over. Thank you, Frede Olesen. Thank you, Mads Koch Hansen. Thank you, Christian Freitag. Thank you.